On the 9th of September 2009, about 2 minutes after midnight, 28-year-old Irina Safonova entered her apartment building where she lived with her son and younger brother. In her hand she held a keychain. She picked out a key, opened the mailbox and took out a fresh newspaper. She then turned around, pressed the elevator button, the doors opened and Irina stepped inside. About half an hour later, a neighbor coming back home found the keys and the newspaper lying on the floor of the elevator. And Irina would never be seen again. Привет! My name is Andrei and welcome to my first video. My plan for the channel is to tell you grim, mysterious and imagine often pretty depressing stories from the lands of the former Soviet Union. At least for now, as I do need some competitive advantage over the myriad other similar channels here on YouTube. I will endeavor to tell you the stories you are unlikely to have heard, them being behind a language barrier that I can thankfully navigate. Aliens, mysteries, disappearances, murders, cryptids, conspiracy theories. Whatever piques my morbid curiosity, I shall tell you about, as long as it happened in or around Russia. Now, enough with the introductions, let's get to the first story. Irina lived in Novosibirsk, the biggest city in the eastern part of Russia, founded in 1893 on the banks of the river Oby. More than 3,000 kilometers, or for my American viewers, 30,000 football fields away from the capital, Moscow. She was renting an apartment in Akademgorodok, the Academy Town, a district built in the Soviet times to accommodate engineers and scientists, moving to Novosibirsk with the plans of making it a scientific mecca. Akademgorodok is situated 20 kilometers or 12 miles from the city center and surrounded by a dense forest, purposefully left untouched during the construction of the district in 1958. Irina worked as a child psychologist at the Psychological and Pedagogical Youth Assistance Center Raduga, Rainbow, an organization with the goal of helping troubled kids and their parents by providing mental health assistance. It still exists today. Irina married early, right after school, and in 1999 gave birth to a son, Andrei, which is the same name as mine. It is a pretty common name in Russia, the English equivalent being Andrew. Irina's marital situation was complicated, to say the least. She was separated from her husband, but not officially divorced. The husband, Vladimir, moved to Moscow several years before our story happened. According to her mom, Irina, for some time, hoped that they would get back together. They stayed in contact and even from time to time went on vacations as a family. But it turned out that Vladimir lived with another woman in Moscow. He also had a child with that woman in 2007, which Irina seemed to have been clueless about up until the spring of 2009. And so Irina decided to rekindle an old flame, being courted by the 27-year-old Alexander Skurihin, whom she knew very well back from the school days. They seemed to have had a rather long on-again, off-again relationship, alternating between friendship and romance. Alexander would later say that they were a couple for 7 years, which doesn't make much sense since it would have been well before Vladimir moved to Moscow. Let's just say Irina's love life wasn't straightforward, and leave it at that. On the night of her disappearance, Alexander and Irina went on another date. This time to the somewhat recently renovated Pobeda movie theater in the center of the town, to watch the Quentin Tarantino movie, The Inglourious Basterds, which just came out. After the film was over, Alexander drove Irina to her apartment building. They sat in the car for a little bit, then said their goodbyes and Irina went home. Now, I am not trying to be judgmental, or maybe I am, but it is always a good idea to escort your lady right up to the door of her apartment. Russian подъезд, a hallway, entryway, a lobby of an apartment building, is not the safest of places, especially at night. I am generalizing, of course. It's not like you enter any building in Russia and start dodging drug addicts, drunkards and rapists. But it might happen. It is much safer now, but back in 2009 there were no cameras everywhere like these days. Not in Novosibirsk anyway. On that night, Alexander did not escort Irina, he just watched her enter the building and left, which would haunt him ever since. Well, that is, if he's telling the truth, but on that later. He did check up on her, sending her a goodnight message about 10 minutes after she left. The message was delivered, but Irina didn't reply. This wasn't that out of the ordinary. Sometimes she would just come home, turn off the phone and fall on the bed, exhausted from the long day. Meanwhile, Irina's 10-year-old son Andrei and her brother Ilya, a university student, were waiting for her to come back home. They knew where she was and with whom, since earlier that day she asked Andrei if she could go to the movies, which, according to him, was a little weird. The first time his mom asked him if he's okay with her going out. But still not that weird. Having waited until dark, the guys left the apartment hallway lights on for Irina just in case and went to sleep, thinking that she'll come back later, or maybe she stayed at Alexander's place after the date or something. The night passed, and in the early hours of the next day at 7:30, Alexander tried calling Irina to wish her a good morning. But her mobile phone was turned off. He then called on the landline. Irina's son picked up the phone and told him that mom never came home. When the phone rang, he was just checking her room and saw the undisturbed bed. Right away, Alexander and Ilya went to the police to file a missing persons report. Thus, the search began. The word of Irina's disappearance spread like wildfire throughout Novosibirsk, both via word of mouth and internet forums, making this case the first viral piece of news in the city ever, due to the internet finally reaching enough homes and due to the circumstances of the disappearance. People have disappeared in Novosibirsk before and will do so after. Young women as well. Less than a week before Irina disappeared, the body of Yulia Kireyeva was finally found in the swamp on the outskirts of the city. She went missing in May of 2009, having left a nightclub suddenly and without telling her friends. But Irina didn't go to a nightclub, she didn't enter a stranger's car or drunkenly stumbled across dark alleyways in the middle of the night. She basically vanished right from her doorstep, which terrified the people of the city, especially those who lived in the Akademgorodok district. Almost immediately, volunteers started organizing on the internet to help search for Irina. Dozens on the first day, hundreds later on. They would print and spread posters, talk to the people in the neighboring buildings, in case someone was smoking on the balcony and saw something. They were checking nearby attics and basements, sweeping through the forest, to no avail. Not to belittle the kind people who took the time out of their busy lives to help look for Irina, but the search was admittedly pretty chaotic and disorganized, even according to those who participated. It would still be several years until professional volunteer groups formed in Russia. Groups like Liza Alert, for example, who help coordinate volunteers and facilitate effective searches for missing people. The police were actively working on the case, yet all they had were the words of Alexander and Irina's keys. The keys which were found that very night by the neighbor, coming home not long after Irina supposedly disappeared right from the elevator. Like any good neighbor, the lady took the keys home and in the morning posted a piece of paper with the words "Lost keys found" in the hallway of the building. The keys and the newspaper were the only piece of hard evidence, and sadly remain such even to this day. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no torn button from Irina's jacket. Nothing. just the keys laying on the floor covered with the newspaper found by the neighbor. The police considered a multitude of possibilities, from kidnapping and murder to Irina just deciding to leave it all behind and run away to start a new life. They checked all of the hospitals and morgues in case she, say, collapsed in the elevator and somebody took her there. Also, it's really dumb, but I'm still going to mention it. There was talk that the deed was done by a group of Satanists, mostly because of the date, 9th of September 2009. 999, or if you turn it upside down, the number of the beast. And on the topic of the supernatural, later on the family and the volunteers would also pay psychics in the hopes that they would help find Irina. The witches and the warlocks, of course, gave random answers and didn't help at all. While I am being snarky, I do not judge Irina's family at all. When you are that desperate, you will try anything, but I do judge the parasites who exploit that desperation for monetary gain. One of these days I would really love to make a video about all of the mumbo-jumbo that exploded in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union and its state atheism, like charging water through TV and numerous prophets, psychics and cults. Not today though. The main suspect in the disappearance of Irina was, unsurprisingly, Alexander. After all, he was the last person to see her. Police interrogated him thoroughly. At least that's what they say and what he says. There is no requirement by law in Russia to record police interrogations, like in the United States, so in my future videos concerning crimes in Russia you will almost never see videos of police interviews. We just have to take their word that they did a good job of it. Later on, answering questions from a local newspaper, Alexander would say that the interrogation was rough, psychologically. He describes good cop, bad cop routines being used, a lie detector, which is true and which he passed, not that it means anything, and the police pressuring him for information or confession for 5 hours straight without any breaks. But in the end, he was cleared. Police checked his car, his phone, and found no evidence that he was lying. And that was basically it for the investigation. Not for the lack of will to investigate, but for the absence of anything. Irina's somewhat estranged husband, Vladimir, was under suspicion as well. Vladimir, by the way, quickly arrived in Novosibirsk to help with the search and answer any questions police had. He was likewise cleared very quickly. Public opinion split on this topic. Many suspected Alexander, and still do. He was the most obvious potential perpetrator. I couldn't find a lot of concrete information about him, and he basically disappeared from the internet not long after, deleting his social media. What I have found is hearsay, so please take it as such. He was considered one of the, what is called in Russia, Zolotaya Молодежь, golden youth. Basically wealthy young people whose money usually comes not from hard work but from their rich parents. Be they politicians, businessmen, criminals, or, as it often is in the former Soviet republics, a mix of all three. These youngsters are known to be brash, arrogant, and spend their time partying, doing drugs, and frequenting nightclubs without a care in the world. You definitely know the type, as it is not a Russian thing, but a human thing. Alexander wasn't poor or working class, that's for sure. At 27 years old, he had a nice car, a dacha, a summer home, and a boat. He wasn't filthy rich, at least it doesn't look that way, but he was well-to-do enough to make him easily hateable for some. Is it possible that he did it and then bribed the police to make the consequences go away? Sure. The remnants of the Soviet bloc are infamous for their corruption, and that infamy is very well founded. Many crimes, both petty and horrific, have been concealed for the right price or by knowing the right people. Is it probable? Nah, I don't think so. Irina's disappearance went very public, very fast, and public outcry and scrutiny usually works as a good disinfectant for crime cover-ups. It makes them too much of a hassle to conceal. If the police had any hard evidence or even a really strong suspicion, I doubt that they would have let him go. Then again, it is exceedingly strange that if Irina was attacked in the hallway of her apartment building by a random guy she didn't know, she wouldn't scream or try and fight, alerting the neighbors or at least leaving some sign of a struggle. She was, of course, a small woman, 156 centimeters tall, or about 5'1" for my American viewers. But still, however small and weak, she was almost home, not on some deserted road in the middle of nowhere. That is, if Alexander is telling the truth, and Irina really did make it to her apartment building that night. He could have done something to her and planted the keys in the elevator later, to make it look like she disappeared a couple of steps from home. Alexander was very active in the search for Irina, helping to organize it and participating himself. Some see it as a guilty man trying his hardest to show how concerned he is, to alleviate suspicion. Local people say that around a month after the disappearance, his fervor faded, and a couple of months later he was posting numerous photos of himself and his friends having fun and inviting people to go snowboarding. Some would say unbecoming of a man who recently lost the love of his life. Irina's parents, on the other hand, knew Alexander pretty well, and for what it's worth, they don't believe he would have done anything to hurt their daughter. Ilya, Irina's brother, holds the same opinion and considers Alexander a good person. Alexander is now married, still living in Novosibirsk, with his wife and son. All these years he kept in touch with Irina's mother, and she says that for a long time he felt ashamed of his newfound love and happiness, with Irina still missing. Vladimir, the husband, still lives in Moscow with the same unnamed woman and their now 2 children. He never officially divorced Irina, nor married his current partner, choosing to remain in a common law marriage. Irina's son, Andrei, moved to Moscow with his father for a time. Once he had finished school, he returned to Novosibirsk to try and figure out his mother's fate. He requested all the case materials from the police and pored over them, in an attempt to find something that they'd missed. But sadly, it seems there was nothing to find. Andrei doesn't like to talk about the tragedy that befell him, not with the press and not even with his family. He recalls the time where he would obsessively read everything about his mother's disappearance. The forums, the news articles, the blog posts, and one time where he was doing just this, his father entered the room, looked at the computer screen and said that people write a lot of bullshit about the case. That was about the only time Andrei and his father discussed what happened. And people do say a lot of unsubstantiated bullshit, that is absolutely true. Folks like to gossip and make things up, Russians included, especially on the internet, where you face little to no consequences for spewing nonsense. Andrei lives in Moscow now, working as an Aikido trainer. One of the few times he did talk to the press, he addressed the still unknown person who took his mother, and asked him to man up and make contact. He said that he doesn't care anymore if the person would be punished or not. He just wants to know what happened that night. He just wants closure. And that is the main aspect of this story that makes it so dark for me. Death is unavoidable. It is a part of life. I have lost relatives. All of you watching have as well, or will lose someone inevitably at some point. Old age, sickness, or even sudden violent death is a somber affair, but it is final. Not having that finality, always wondering, always living with that tiny spark of hope, however false it may seem, keeping the wound from healing, that is, to me, something truly horrifying. The case of Irina Safonova is still open, but there hasn't been any progress whatsoever. No breakthrough, no new leads, nothing at all. From time to time it is discussed on the Russian-speaking part of the internet, even all of these years later. Articles, blog posts and YouTube videos, very much like this one but in Russian, keep it from fading into oblivion, like many such cases often do. This ebb and flow of public interest seems to have even made the chairman of the Investigative Committee of Russia, Alexander Bastrykin, request a report on the case. But this happened about a year ago, and, quoting a Russian fable, «Да только воз и ныне там», meaning nothing's changed. Thus ends my first video. Thank you for watching until the very end. If you enjoyed what you have witnessed, be it when the video just came out and has a couple of views, or years later when it hopefully has a couple of views more, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed. That's about it. Thank you again so much for watching, and до свидания.